it is meant to be. And hopefully we will reach out and in this lifetime or the next one. So I'm down for that.
Thank you very much, Bashir, for that insightful presentation. So the explosion in Beirut has been reported worldwide, and most of us, if not all of us, have seen it on social media or on the mainstream news. So we see that the case, the reason for it is not exactly as simple as ammonium nitrate. So as Bashir said, it seems to be a symptom of the underlying system in Lebanon. And after years and years of the ruling class perpetuating that system, these issues pile up and eventually result to societal ills and magnified economic crisis. And how we must oppose how imperialism misuses science, and how we must treat science politically and use it for the people to solve these social issues. So thank you again so much. Our next speaker is a founding member and executive director of IT for Change, or ITFC, where she leads research on emerging issues in the digital context, such as the platform economy, data and AI governance, democracy in the digital age, and feminist frameworks on digital justice. She also directs ITFC's Field Resource Center that works with grassroots rural communities on technology for social change models. She actively engages in national and international advocacy on digital rights and contributes regularly to academic and media spaces. So let's give it up for Anita Gurumurthy.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's an honor to be here. I was requested to speak to the role of surveillance technology industry in maintaining the security apparatus of fascist regimes. Very complex subject, and I'm sure we can have several sessions to discuss this within this group. What I will do is, one second, I'm trying to get to my slide. Yeah, thank you. So the technological paradigm, obviously, and its linkages to imperialism have to be unpacked at every epoch. So it's not as if the industrial paradigm does not continue now, but I think it's very important for social movements and people who really are at the forefront of people's struggles to understand the continuities and the discontinuities at every epochal turn. And at this point in time, we are at a certain conjuncture which can be described as, in various ways, as surveillance capitalism, intelligence capitalism. And basically what it really means is that there is a new way in which production systems are getting organized, and that defines the way in which oppression or exploitation, as we have known it, actually transmutates. Could I have the next slide, please? Yes. So as I was thinking about how, I can present IT for Change's work today and perhaps, connect the very many dots that are part of our collective minds, I was thinking it might be a good idea to focus on what's really happening in two big democracies in the world, ostensibly liberal democracies, US and India. And so what I did with my colleagues is put together a few examples from both these contexts so that I could elucidate, the kinds of reflections we as an organization have had in the past few years. So what's fascism? We understand it as a form of far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalism. And we know that it is not only characterized by dictatorial power or the autocracy or the authoritarianism, but also a forcible suppression of opposition, as well as a certain disciplining or regimentation of society and economy, which basically means that citizens have to self-discipline themselves, because the initial the way power works initially is through repression, and subsequently, of course, through the chilling effect, right? So today, I would think that the US and India are slipping into this kind of popular authoritarianism, and many people would actually submit that they already are into this kind of a phase. But it's quite evident that this turn to a rollback from all the constitutional liberal values that these societies espoused, this turn towards a de-democratization is not accidental. It has something to do with the technological paradigm and a certain path dependency within surveillance capitalism. So in this photograph, you actually see Trump holding the Bible. You know, this was on June 1st, immediately after the George Floyd protests. And, you know, he went to a church which had just been blown up the previous night, and he picked up the Bible, and it was a photo op. And of course, you know, it was as if the message was very clear, you know, join us, you know, we are the team that is winning. And on the right, you actually see the Prime Minister in India presiding over a function which is a triumphalism of majoritarian politics, you know, a kind of, you know, even a tenuous separation that used to exist between politics and a very pluralistic society. And therefore, you know, our constitution really was proud about diversity and pluralism, you know, and something happened at this moment where this participation in an official ceremony, which was about a post-Supreme Court verdict on a disputed land, you know, and I'm not here to dispute that verdict, but I'm just saying that once the Supreme Court verdict was passed in favor of the majoritarian community, and also the Supreme Court instructed the government to develop a trust so that the trust could build a temple, you know. So the trust, in spite of this current crisis, and all of you know that India is really in the throes of the COVID pandemic. Even now, you know, our graph is showing no signs of any respite. And at this point in time, the fact that politics kind of very brazenly, you know, steps into a realm and a zone that has been unprecedented also signals a kind of populist authoritarianism. This is, of course, a context, and just like my previous speaker laid out the crisis of the system, I too would like to do that. Next slide, please. Okay, so many of you must have had an occasion to at least learn about, if not have had an occasion to read Shoshana Zuboff's book on surveillance capitalism. She refers to this as economic system centered around the commodification of personal data, the core purpose of which is nothing other than accumulation by surveillance. So the idea of dispossession is very much there, but what really is extracted in this paradigm is not just natural resources or raw materials, but certainly human nature. So surveillance capitalism's endeavor to modify behavior at scale, you know, not just locally, but simply at scale because of the nature of AI technologies or intelligence technologies, affects society and human beings at very deep levels. You know, it takes away our autonomy, it takes away our thought, because we're constantly told what may be in our interest to shop, what may be in our interest to do, what may be in our interest to pursue in entertainment. So there is really a little capacity for, you know, at a social level, for the moral judgment that is so necessary for critical thinking to develop in society. And this, of course, is one aspect. The second aspect is the unprecedented concentration of knowledge and power that accrues to surveillance capitalists. I mean, they know everything about us and we know very little about them. And even as the world was getting poorer and economies were going through a very, very big depression of this century, you know, certain capitalists, you know, for instance, Jeff Bezos was only getting richer. So the economic logic of surveillance capitalism has spread beyond the tech world today, and it has firmly ensconced itself in social and economic systems. Virtually every economic sector, from automobiles to insurance to health, education, finance, and every product which can be described as smart, and every service that can be described as personalized. So we need to be really alarmed about it, because this is not because of the mere compilation of information about us that we give corporations, but a larger systemic project in which there is a certain accumulation of data, which leads to the generation and cornering and enclosure of intelligence. Next slide. Evidently, the state-capital nexus in this paradigm can be unpacked in many ways, and I'd like to focus on the network-state complex through three lenses. One is national security, the second is welfare delivery, and the third is propaganda warfare. So the next slide. So we are on national security now. The next slide, please. So I'd like to really start with talking about how liberal constitutionalism fails to control internet surveillance. So this is a very important thing because we have always known that these contestations about freedom are not new, right? But we also know that the only way we can reclaim and articulate afresh all our rights is through a certain constitutionalism. But what we actually see in the past 15 to 20 years, and particularly very intensively in the past 10 years, is a certain brazen shift towards a privatization of governance and a complete shift from public law systems to a private law system. And the Snowden disclosures about the NSA, we all know in 2013, revealed numerous global surveillance programs. And shortly after the publication of the reports by first The Guardian and then the Washington Post, the United States Director of National Intelligence came up and he released a statement that for 6 years, the government had indeed been using internet services, companies such as Facebook and others, to collect information on foreigners. And this was a defense against national security threats. And he insisted that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act will not be used or cannot be used intentionally to target US citizens. Of course, the PRISM program and other children of the FISA were very much targeting US citizens. Not that that discrimination is important, you know, foreigners or citizens. The fact remains that Snowden managed to uncover this unauthorized disclosure of information to all these state agencies. So on paper, PRISM was about foreigners. And Obama came up and actually said that you cannot have 100% security and then also have 100% privacy and zero inconvenience. So he posited this entire post 9/11 moment as, you know, we've got to make some choices as a society. So you trade something to get something. Now, NSA's backdoor included Vodafone and BT, which were telecom companies, and of course, internet companies like Google, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. Warrantless internet searches continued, and communications data till today can be seized in the US. Not just metadata, but also content can actually be taken. Next slide, please. In 2018, we actually see Trump come back, and, you know, every 6 years, this particular FISA, this law has to be passed again, you know, by the House. Very little change was made, and despite the hullabaloo around privacy and all of that, and you know, it seemed like the arbitrary powers of the agencies have continued post-Snowden. And very importantly, in May 2020, the US Senate rejected an amendment that would require a warrant to search internet browsing histories. So the Patriot Act was supposed to be amended, but the Senate completely rejected it. What's very interesting is that long ago in 2013, Trump said Snowden is a spy who should be executed, but currently he is all in favor of giving a pardon for Snowden. But that's an aside. These positions have nothing to do with the state and surveillance capital nexus, and certainly do not concern the broader citizen sentiment about privacy. It might just be like, you know, to capture the electorate and, you know, seem to indicate a certain sympathy for privacy, etc. Next slide. In the context of India, I want to just place some facts in front of you. The National Crime Records Bureau is in the process of opening up bids from companies for building automated facial recognition systems. this is pretty scary because globally there is adequate consensus among the technical communities as well as UN-related bodies that facial recognition technology is really, really something that we should not tread in the direction of. And if at all, it should be co-opted through a process of democratic deliberation. We also have, and this happened in our situation also because of the 2008 invasion in Bombay. There was a terror attack, and this was across the border. And since then, there is this idea of the National Intelligence Grid, which is the intelligence master database for counterterrorism purposes, ostensibly, and it integrates databases of various security agencies and has comprehensive patterns, of at least 21 different organizations, and this is available around the clock. Next slide. What's important is not that the state should not perform its role in security or national integrity. That's of course why states, like to perpetuate their power. That's why nation states exist. But the problem is that there is absolutely no legality or legal basis. And we have, in the recent past, also noticed that a lot of private agencies, so you need technology companies, and then to interpret their complex terms of reference, you need legal think tanks. So there is an entire industry, and all of these are fueling mass surveillance and data collection. And in India, you also have a situation of a human DNA profiling bill, which civil society has really raised its voice against. And there's no public debate on AI technologies. And what's strange is, Julian Assange said once very powerfully that even an AK-47 rifle is not as dangerous a weapon as surveillance technologies. That's because of the centralization of power in the integration of databases, So it's a little bit like have database, shall surveil, So it's a heady and slippery slope. And once you put in place an automated system, you create a stake that helps you keep it centralized. So you can't afford to not keep it centralized because you have a stake in that. And what I wanted to draw your attention to is that legality is seen as a very undesirable route. Necessity and proportionality are not debated with citizens. A huge network industry complex creates a deep state. I mean, not even politicians and ministers are aware about the web network of power operating parallelly with the state agencies. And the wonderful art of messy democracy is eroded by a precise science of expert-driven governance. So next slide. Many of you may be familiar with the NSO Group, an Israel-based private technology firm whose spyware called Pegasus, that does remote surveillance, has actually been identified as operating in many, many countries. They use a vulnerability which patch in WhatsApp, and Citizen Lab has tracked that this spyware was operating in 45 different countries. And this spyware was also installed on the Saudi Arabian by Saudi Arabia on journalist Jamal Khashoggi's mobile, and that he was killed later on. In Mexico, human rights lawyers and journalists have filed a criminal complaint alleging use of Pegasus by the government to spy on them. 121 Indian citizens actually petitioned the ministry and said, is it true? Is it true that state agencies have been spying on us? And the ministry, of course, the Home Ministry denied the allegation. Next slide. Now I move to welfare surveillance. The next slide. So neoliberal authoritarianism comes with the language of efficiency. What we need to understand about welfare is that it basically means that inordinate resources are put to the noble cause of making sure that undeserving people do not steal the state's resources. So the case of welfare surveillance is based simply on sorting, sorting of citizens and non-citizens, deserving citizens and undeserving citizens, undeserving others, rightful majoritarian citizens and dubious minority free riders, useful respectable citizens and disposable non-human bodies, and so on. So you actually have a category, and once you have a database, you can use multiple algorithms and filters to create these categories. And what's very important to know is that these have very, very dire consequences for society, because there is a certain determinism here. And this fraud detection system adopted in Michigan made 48,000 fraud accusations. This was to collect repayments, because the whole idea was, we want to make a very, very efficient welfare system. And on account of this, the financial stress on the accused resulted in a wide range of implications, impacts: evictions, destroyed credit scores, homelessness, bankruptcies, and even suicide. And 93% of fraud determinations were actually wrong. So the question is, who's to be held accountable for the algorithms? Next slide, please. This brings me to India's digital ID program. Very strangely, it's called a Citizen Digital ID program, which is not about citizenship at all. In fact, the website of Aadhaar clearly disassociates itself, and it just says it's an ID number. It has nothing to do with your citizenship. So, but of course, it has everything to do with the way welfare is managed, and citizen rights are tied in. And India has built, or is in the process of building, a social registry, to score all citizens on the basis of the citizen data system. There's no parliamentary scrutiny on the enactment of the legislation on social registry. And there are reports of foreign tech firms, accessing unencrypted citizen data from the Aadhaar database. So the poorest people in India who are undocumented continuously live in a fear that they will be exposed or called out. So there is a huge undertaking to plug leakages, which converts all rights-based claims and entitlements into one big exercise of creating a corporeal crisis. So I would like the next slide. And this is a very simple, graph. And I want to tell you that this was done by one of our independent news media. During the lockdown, people were asked, why did you not avail of government schemes? And an overwhelming percentage of people said that it was because they didn't actually have the Aadhaar card, or because I want to draw your attention to the last scale. 89% said that their Aadhaar card had not been linked with their bank account. So they couldn't actually go and claim their entitlements. These were all poor people, poor farmers, poor street vendors, migrants, and others. So there's a strange situation here. Someone recently said, and I want to quote this: Aadhaar is, so I am. So if I don't actually have an Aadhaar card, I am not. I don't exist, right? Next slide. Aadhaar was passed as a money bill. It was publicly funded, and a money bill means that it is passed by the lower house. It doesn't require to be debated in the upper house. And it basically has become, unfortunately, a means by which business models in different sectors can be built. Today, there is a proposal for a national digital health ID program, and there's a draft policy for health data management systems. And very interestingly, at the same moment, we see that in India, our domestic surveillance capitalist, Reliance and Amazon are slowly entering into the e-pharma business. And this is very important, because once you have an integratable database of citizens and you have an e-pharma, then your backend can be integrated to many, many businesses. You can have, consultations with doctors. You can do everything, including maybe surgeries online, who knows. Next slide. I won't pay too much attention to it, but I really want to draw your attention to this contact tracing app. Everybody's doing contact tracing, but this was done and there's absolutely no privacy basis. The app was announced and a private think tank was involved in building this. And after a month of the app's operation, they thought about privacy. The protocol is still incomplete, and it allows for sharing of data with third parties. And what is ironic is we really don't have a strong epidemiological surveillance database, in terms of our legacy systems. So how are you even going to identify who's vulnerable? How are you going to provide services just by having this kind of a layer? There seems to be in this entire discourse a certain enchantment, a certain headiness, about efficiency through these data systems, which is not thought through and certainly not democratic. There is data, and we must trust in data experts. Next slide. This is my last set of analysis. How much time do I have more?
You have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I will take care of the time. So this is about the public sphere. So next slide. So in 2016, the Trump campaign hired Cambridge Analytica to take over its data operations. And what they noticed is a disproportionate amount of pro-Trump messaging was spread via automated bots and anti-Hillary Clinton propaganda, and Trump's bots outnumbered Clinton's 5-1. So on the right side of the slide, you will see that there's a world map, and this is from the marketing team of Cambridge Analytica. They've been everywhere. An SCL election, which is a parent company of Cambridge Analytica, has an astounding track record, more than 100 election campaigns in over 30 countries, spanning 5 continents. And you know, for instance, in the Caribbean island of St. Kitts, for instance, this company was proudly able to boast that it was able to delay elections and stage a national pride campaign that helped its client hold on to power in the late 2000s. That is, you know, you want to show that you're a very inclusive kind of a party. Slide 19. We don't need more proof that we live through a connection, through an epoch where there's a connection between organized hate and organized misinformation. Facebook's role in actively endorsing hate through its so-called content governance policies has increasingly come to light, and one instance is the Wisconsin shootings. And a self-proclaimed militia group had used the Facebook page, its own Facebook page, to call, to issue a call to arms, which was in violation of Facebook's policies. And several people pointed out that this is going to happen before the shooting. But of course, this was still retained online. Slide 20. At this point in time in India, we are going through a very big scandal, and the top official in Facebook in India has been accused of treating the ruling party in a very prejudicial fashion, and not applying the rules of Facebook to politicians' accounts and to accounts belonging to Hindu nationalist individuals and groups. And Facebook has a lot to care about in terms of India's its market interests in India. You know, we are the largest growing market for Facebook, and it cares really about its relationship with the ruling party. And many people have actually said that Facebook is trying to push its own currency, Libra, and it would really not want to rock the boat. And it recently also invested in Jio, Reliance's Jio, which is a platform of Asia's richest capitalist, and is hoping that Libra can somehow be pushed into the Indian economic ecosystem. Slide 21. So we're well and truly entrenched in surveillance capitalism, and global governance mechanisms don't seem to be geared up at all. I'll wrap up in the next 2 to 3 minutes. There are indications within EU's legal system that mass surveillance is being accepted as the new normal. And this, even the European Commission's Human Rights Court has given a recent judgment where a group of NGOs, Big Brother Watch and others, they took the UK government to the European court. The court, of course, awarded the case in favor of Big Brother Watch, but it said, if procedural safeguards are in place, then bulk surveillance is still okay. So this is actually quite disturbing. We also see that digital trade provisions are cleverly worded to restrict the ability of developing countries to demand algorithmic accountability. So US policy proposals in e-commerce, for instance, will routinely say that, we will not share our algorithms, they are our trade secret, and so developing countries are unable to really open up these algorithms. And we also see a kind of tussle in global cooperation on cybersecurity. There seems to be really a kind of an impasse. And so you see a legitimation and normalization of surveillance also through global development finance, ODI, and this is something that the previous speaker also spoke about. Next slide. So data is becoming a priori truth and the only truth, right? And this data governmentality is subsuming into capital everything. On the right side of the slide, you see how there's a new project, the World Earth Bank of Codes. The World Economic Forum is now codifying the oceans, codifying all the natural phenomena. And this is ostensibly to create an open database. And we know what that means. Next slide. But I think all is not lost. We really have the whistleblowers. We have employees of the GAFA companies who have time and again questioned the collusion between Pentagon and tech companies. They have called out this manipulative algorithmic regimes of these companies. And we have engineers, the IEEE, which is really trying to push for ethics, community ethics in autonomous and intelligent systems. Interestingly, the Australian Information Commissioner has taken Facebook to court and has said that electoral tampering is something that's very, very serious. Next slide. At the global level, the special rapporteurs have also played a very important role. The special rapporteur on extreme poverty has said that in the digital welfare state, big tech operates in a human rights zone. And we must remember it because there's something that needs to be done at the level of the UN about the power of big tech. There's been a General Assembly resolution on the right to privacy in the digital age. And the Special Rapporteur on Protection of Human Rights while countering terrorism has condemned mass electronic surveillance. The next slide. Of course, there is always the role for people's movements. And I think that people's movements are coalescing around this issue, in the recent past, and a lot remains to be done. And this seminar is one of those, I think, projects of trying to bring together this kind of solidarity so that we can push back. In my country, we have people struggle against the Aadhaar ID, public interest litigation, which gave us the very, very important right to privacy judgment. World over, there is a recognition of the idea of community data, from people who are like farming community in the US, the Maori tribes have, in the Pacific have pointed out to how indigenous data belongs to indigenous communities. And in my country, we see very, very important alliances between platform workers, street hawkers, farmers for a right to, people's right to data. The next and last slide. Those who are familiar with Banksy's work may have seen these things. I also think that there is increasingly in people's imagination, in the imagination of artists and in the imagination of people who are creating alternative ways to ignite public consciousness, an attempt to call out at this surveillance tech connection, which is advanced capitalism's current trajectory. And I would end my presentation by saying that a lot remains to be done, and we have to be together in accomplishing this, the struggles that need to be done to check exploitation and extractivism in the 21st century. Thank you very much.